Hello, welcome to another Max Chroma YouTube video. In this video, I'm going to be going over one of my free products, the Max Chroma RGB and CMY Adjustment and Colorizer Layers. Now let me just go back. This is available on my payhip.com/maxchroma website. Open that in a new tab. And this series of videos I'm going to be releasing is going to start off as just showing what these things do, and it's also related to the Max Chroma Master Colorist Action Pack. So essentially, there is a preview image. Here we go. If I go ahead and open that, in the Max Chroma Master Colorist Action Pack, it starts off with essentially what is a luminosity mask generator, black, gray, 2 grays, 3 grays. So there's a grayscale section, and also these custom color sections, but I'll go over those in separate videos. The RGB is where I want to start, as basically it's the initial color model that Photoshop works in automatically. That action set has a whole bunch of other extractions it starts to go into, getting into the HCWB or hue, chroma, white, and black. Also ones with gray. And the colorizing that it does, it basically splits your image into layers of various colors that were in the image, and then you can start to recolor it. So there's things that start to split into hues, hues with tones, more hues and more tones, etc. So it sort of continues down into extracting an image into more and more divisions of color. I'm also going to have this product available for free on my Adobe Exchange page, but the way I do this is usually put out the video first so that when I make the product page for Adobe Exchange, I can link that video directly. They usually want you to put a video in when you create a product there. So if you get the free, so essentially I'm showing each of these components of the Master Colorist Action Pack, some of which are free. So the RGB and CMY Adjustment Colorizer Layers actions for Adobe Photoshop, this is a separate action that is really just those RGB and CMY section of the Master Colorist Action Pack. Not everything in the Master Colorist Action Pack is available as its own free action. Obviously, I wouldn't then be selling it. So it's more like the stuff that takes a lot more work for me to create and has a lot more in-depth extractions of color, some other more advanced features. Those are the things that you wouldn't necessarily just get for free from one of the other actions. It's the stuff that's the smart colorizing and the extra hues and tints and tones and shades. But right now, I think the best way for me to go about explaining and instructing what all those different parts do in the Master Colorist Action Pack is there's first going to be a few free things that I break out as modules, I guess, from that pack, and then have a separate video on just that. So you can get the Max Chroma RGB and CMY Adjustment and Colorizer Layers action on this page for free. So you could just download that, and you'd enter your email address, hit continue. It would send you an email, and then you would find the link to download them there. Okay. And then let me just go to the downloads, and we'll have, say I don't need those right now, but essentially when you download those, that's just an oscilloscope program, other set of videos I may start doing with sound and music related stuff. But basically you will get an 8-bit ATN file and a 16-bit ATN file. And what I'm going to do in this video and the next series of videos to keep them short is just show what it does only and make a playlist that goes into, more in-depth detail on how it works, certain examples and functions inside the actions. But this one is relatively basic. So if I want to bring that into Photoshop, if I've got Photoshop already open and I have my Actions panel, so Window Actions, there's a number of ways. Easiest is if these are linked to Photoshop, they open with Photoshop, then I would just double click this. And now it's in there in my actions. And so there's 4 actions in here: RGB Additive, RGB plus white, CMY subtractive, and CMY plus black. Let me go ahead and delete that action. And I'll explain in other videos about the 8-bit versus 16-bit, but either one would do the same thing when you install it. Now I can just drag it into Photoshop. Same thing there. Or you can navigate. I could do load actions and go and find it in that downloads folder. So I'll just double click, it's in there. Okay, and then I've got a few basic test files. The first one I think I'll show is this RGB Light Layers. I was going to use this to sort of make a video just about RGB itself. But basically in Photoshop, it functions usually by default, but one of the most common modes people use it in is RGB color. I'll get into other stuff about some of the other modes, whether they're destructive to your original RGB values or not. But I like to stay in RGB and do all my color adjustments and everything within RGB and sort of simulate the other modes. One thing you can't really do when you're in RGB is it's sort of showing things with channels, always just a composite of what would be the red light, the green light, and the blue light making up the image. Obviously, I'll get into RGB itself in another video. I'm assuming that you do know a little bit about how RGB works. You can go into Photoshop and go to Preferences, Interface, and change whether those channels show channels in color or not. So it's just over in the channels thing here, the channels panel. It shows channels in color, either or not. So I set that before. I just wanted you to know that that's how I'm seeing them look appear as red right here in this panel. Make that a little bigger. So in the layers, I've built this simulating over a black background. I have a red light, essentially a red layer mask that has a color overlay, and then that is set to linear dodge add. So it's the blend mode, linear dodge add, is essentially being like light adding. The colors are adding to each other. So it's adding this red light to the black background. Then you have green, and where they overlap makes yellow. You have blue, where that overlaps green makes cyan, where it overlaps red makes magenta, where the three overlap makes white. So that's the basics of how RGB works. This button will work on a flattened image. So this example is not really what we're going to start with. We're usually starting with a flattened image. That's what all of these products are based on, is you have a flattened image and you want to extract and work with the color components, still making your original together, but split out into layers, and then you can do things to those layers. I usually have it set with just colorizers, so you can just change the colors. With the channels, you can't do that by default. So that's where I'm getting at with this particular action. And starting off things, why do I make these actions? What am I doing this stuff for? It's things that you can't already do in Photoshop by default. So the Max Chroma RGB and CMY Adjustment and Colorizer Layers action for Adobe Photoshop are a new way of simulating color modes in Photoshop while retaining the full gamut of RGB using layers. You can now adjust the color points of the RGB, which is not possible using regular RGB channels, as well as providing an RGB plus white layer split over a black background using additive blending of layers from the original image. Let's start there and get into the CMY next. Okay, so let's say you just have this flattened image. Again, I can't really change, I can't double click or do anything to this red channel. I can't change that it's using red light to show it. It's sort of a default function of Photoshop in RGB mode. It would not be RGB mode if you start changing that stuff. Hitting play on this first button, RGB Additive, is essentially going to give me those channels, but as layers, where I can go in and change the colors of those to just start make basic adjustments to your image. It also has a levels and a curves controller in there for each of those. One of the basic ways that I'm going to show a lot of these things and how I would approach it at first for the most simple level is, let's just go ahead and we'll undo. We have this flattened. So as soon as I hit play, and with the RGB specific actions, I'm going to go up to here and sort everything by mode and then multiply mode for the RGB actions. Now I've just split it to just show me those colorized layers, and I can quickly go in. Let me kind of make those bigger if I can. And that doesn't really affect the size of the little squares. Okay, so if I just double click on that, I can immediately start to change the red, essentially what color is being used to show that red, the primary itself. I can change the hue of it, tint it, shade it, tone it, make it white, black, gray, whatever I want with that. So this is how I'm going to show a lot of these beginning videos, just how it works, or I'm sorry, just what it does, and then save other videos for how it works. So I could just double click the green, make color adjustments there, the blue, etc. But you'll see that each of those change the white. So let's close that. Now let's try the RGB plus white. And again, the first thing I'm going to do is go to filtering this by mode. And I want to do multiply. So now I can just see the white, red, green, and blue. So now the red is being changed, but not affecting the white. Okay, I could change the green, change the blue, really to whatever I want. And the white is by itself now adjustable into any tone or shade I want. Okay, so very easily just taking your flattened original image, splitting it into a certain color model. This one, RGB plus white in this example is really different than RGB. And then making these color changes as the first adjustments that are easiest to do. Now let's look at that with a little bit more of a real world example. And again, in comparison to RGB, so this is a different test sample really. Chroma, white, and black, that's the stuff that goes into all those other modes where I start to extract the tints, the shades, the tones, the grays, and all that stuff. If you were to do this on something like here, you'll see why it's a little different. So I could do the RGB additive, and then I'm going to go to mode, multiply, and just see the red, green, and blue colorizer layers. You don't have to do that. It's just that they're inside these groups. You'd have to go in and grab them like this. Same difference. Turning that on really just filters all the layers to only show you these three. But you'll notice, thinking I'm going to change the red actually changes everything. Not the black, but it changes all the other tones and shades and tints and even the white that are being made in the image, because essentially making this with red, green, and blue light. Okay, if I change the green, you'll see it's not necessarily changing the red or the black, but it's changing all those other colors made by that. Let's close that. Let's do the RGB plus white. Okay. Let's filter by mode, multiply. Now you'll see I can change the red, and it's only changing that red, not this sort of muted green or the white or the gray. So I could just change that to a different hue now. Could change this white, but you'll see it's affecting the tones that are making up that sort of a tint or a tone of that other color, the green. Right? And if I change the green around, you'll see that is basically a different hue. Okay, so again, it's just showing you the difference between RGB and these other color modes. But let's use a more real-world example. This one is sort of a slight step up from the tests. This is like a test, but these cars are in different hues, okay? So if I go again with just the RGB additive, then when I filter that, changing the red is going to change just about everything in the image except for black, really. So in RGB mode, your red, green, and blue generate just about everything. So shifting the hue of the red really changes a lot of the colors. It's not really changing anything that's pure green or pure blue or where those mix with each other. Okay, but it's changing all of the stuff. I just take it out to black. You'll see this is essentially an image without the red in it. It's just the green and blue making it. Let's close that. Now the RGB plus white is a color model now extracting the white by its own. So we go ahead to mode, multiply. Now when I change the red, you'll see I'm basically only changing where it's mixing with the hues, not the black and white and gray mixtures. Okay, but it is affecting where it mixes with green to make yellow and orange, and mixing with blue to make the purples, magentas. Okay, if I take that out completely, you'll see how much the green blends over to the red. The blue blends over to the red there in the RGB model plus white. But I can just change the hue around of that. Recolor the green a bit. And change the blue. But the white is independent now, so you see, but the white's making all the grays, okay, all the sort of the tones and shades. I can make that a color. A lot of these are just extreme adjustments I'm making to show what it does. And then again, this is kind of a step-up test file. Next, we're going to go to something a little more real world. So let's say this one right here. This is a raw image. I'm just going to open it real quick in there. And we will go to RGB Additive. So again, right away, it's the way it's different from making other RGB adjustments is essentially you can go in and just change the what those color points are. So if I just start changing the red, its color point, I can really, it's affecting the whole image. But again, just very easy to make a quick color adjustment to the whole thing. That's something you can't normally do in Photoshop, where you just start changing how what color the green is. Okay. Just like that. Now, I mean, there's ways with color grading and all that stuff. I'm not going to get into that right now. But this is just a basic way to split the image into layers using the colors. If I go back to the original here and you do the RGB plus white, now you see I have a quick, easy control. Go to mode, multiply, to just start changing, colorizing the whites of the image. So maybe I want to just make it like a little warmer. Okay, you can really make subtle adjustments. It's like almost like dusk. Okay, so you can make all sorts of different adjustments to basically the white light of the image, extreme or not, right? And the red now will be sort of just controlling where it mixes with, like I showed, with the green to make yellows and with the blue to make purples. It's not controlling a lot of that car. But one thing you can do, you can always just go to your original image, make some adjustments first. Let's say I saturate it a bit, then run this. And because there's more red in this car this time around, more of the pure bright red, it's going to have more control over what I do to it there, right? Okay, so let's just close that. Now, what's going on with next I'll just show the CMY actions and what those do. So CMY mode is essentially the opposite of RGB mode. If we have RGB being red, green, and blue light over a black background, then CMY is going to be, and that's additive, CMY is going to be the other way around. You can see your cyan, magenta, and yellow are created by the red, green, blue. But let's go ahead and change this. I'm going to invert the background to white. I'm going to change this to linear burn. Same with this one, or actually it's linear burn. So if I had red, green, and blue pigments or inks or transparencies going down over a white background, they would start to mix together and would not be good color. Red and green would make, in the digital world, it makes black, but in the real world, you'd get kind of an ugly brownish color. So what am I doing? I'm actually changing this to be like CMY. So let's change this to magenta. And let's change this to yellow. Change this to cyan. And these are the digital. We're not talking about printing cyan, magenta, yellow inks. It's a whole other topic. Okay, so this is essentially what you have when you've got magenta, yellow, and cyan in a color mode that's subtractive. And so let's go ahead and look at this. So the CMY mode now provides a full gamut CMY or CMY plus black, CMYK, subtractive blend conversion from your original image or artwork. This is very different from going to Photoshop's native and destructive CMYK mode, which cannot be set to a full gamut CMYK. It will always alter the colors of your original image destructively. Now you can set the color points of the CMY or the CMY plus black conversion while retaining all the RGB editing tools and methods, or even combining and mix the two modes in your own creative ways. This action is provided for free because these kind of capabilities really should already be within Photoshop's native color mode options, and because the videos going into how to generate these actions in color layers and layers blends are easy to follow and reproduce on your own. This is an educational approach and provides a basic foundation to understanding digital color models, which become expanded when going into other modes like HSB or HWB, or the HCWB and HCDWB TSGM, that stands for hue, chroma, white, black, tints, shades, grays, and midtones. From the other more extensive actions available through Max Chroma, follow along the journey of discovery while learning about the various color models and spaces and how to work with them. So again, in trying to keep this video short, I'm just going to show how this works. So we're now going to the CMY subtractive mode. And you can see here, if I just move that magenta layer around, so where magenta mixes with yellow, it makes red. Where it mixes with cyan, it makes blue. Where the three mix, makes black. So that's CMY mode. Black would then be its own point in the CMY plus black. So let's just go ahead and flatten this and show you with the subtractive button. And again, if we're in the, if we look at the channels, it's still being shown in red, green, blue. So that's where it starts to really not make sense. You look at an image like this, you think, okay, cyan, yellow, magenta, making these things together over a white background. You can't really just make these adjustments in red, green, blue and think that you're changing those. So playing that action on something like this is now going to split it to cyan, magenta, yellow layers. And let's look at these layer groups. So again, it's over a white background now, and these are set to linear burn. Okay, just like that. The colorizer layer is set to screen. So the way to filter this out is go to mode and screen. Now we can see just the cyan, magenta, yellow. So if I start changing that, you see, okay, I'm colorizing the cyan, how it mixes with the yellow and magenta, right? Magenta, changing that, right? Yellow. Okay, so I'm making quick adjustments to just colorizing those components extracted from the original image. Let's close that and run the CMY plus black. And I'll go to mode, screen. Now you'll see I've got cyan control, magenta control, yellow, but also the black is its own separate control. Let's close that and look at a little more real world example. Let's go to this one. Just show you again. So CMY, all the grayscales in black of the image is going to be made with the CMY together. So we'll go to mode, screen, and then changing the cyan, you see is going to change the grays as well, right? But it's not going to change where the yellow and magenta mix. Let's go ahead and do the CMY plus black. Mode, Screen. Now you'll see changing the cyan just changes that, does not change where all the grayscales are being created. The black is going to give us the control over all of that independently. Okay, could remove the black from the image completely. You see just the hues making it. Colorize it. And then with something like an image, you see we can make these adjustments relatively quickly. I'll close that. So let's just do the CMY plus black. This is basically a full RGB gamut CMYK mode. Does not change anything of the original image's gamut or color reproduction. It's a digital CMY. This one plus the black. So it's like a digital CMYK. Let's go to screen and changing the cyan. So you see I just basically quickly change only those hues. The magenta. You see the magenta will make up some of this stuff here. The yellow. And then the black. So all the shading of the image should be adjusted by that, right? You can change it to anything I want there. Add just a hint of color to it, a lot of color, whatever we want to do. Okay, so I think I'm going to conclude this video there, and just the next video I'm going to get into is the luminosity mask generator, as that's sort of like the second thing in the actions there. The first one is really by itself. I don't have that separated yet out of the Master Colorist Action Pack. I will go ahead and do those and then start getting into all the videos of the Master Colorist Action Pack. I may break out some more of those pieces into another free action set, but this video was to cover the RGB and CMY adjustment and colorizer layers, free action for Adobe Photoshop, what it does. The next videos will just be like this, going over what the actions do in the other products I have available. Okay, thanks for watching and stay tuned for more Max Chroma.